Hi everybody and Happy New Year. This is FIDE Master Dennis Monokroussos, and today we're going to continue and I should say conclude our look at my last round game against Grandmaster Regilio Antonio, played in the 17th North American FIDE Invitational back in late November of the past year. Alright, so we got to I think this position last time, and I'll give a very brief recap for those who haven't seen the last show, though you really should because there's a tremendous amount of detail that I think you'll find interesting. So in any case, I was black, and it was a bishop's opening, which turned into a Vienna, and all of this is quite normal, and I've in fact had this position I think with both sides in my own practice. But bishop to b5 was a move that I'd only vaguely recollected having even ever seen before, and I had never faced it, I don't think. And it's an interesting move. At the cost of a couple of tempi, White is banking on the structural advantage that he's going to have if I allow him to capture on c6 and in a situation where I have to retake with the pawn. In return, of course, I get some dynamic chances, and I have a little bit more space in the center of the board too, and that's what I'll have to rely on. So maybe queen at e7 can be played. I'm not really sure, but it didn't really appeal to me at the time. And okay, I realized that it entailed a certain strategic risk, and one which becomes relevant as the game goes on. But nevertheless, I felt that I hadn't really done anything wrong, and so it was reasonable for me to play this move, to just simply challenge him and make him prove it. Of course, both of us have something to prove. So he took. Now he plays knight to e4, threatening to go to g5, so I drop back. Plays b3. Of course, he wants to fianchetto the bishop and exert some pressure on my e pawn. And if I play a move like f6, once he does that, then I'm going to be in this really fundamentally passive setup, and he can just build and build, maybe play d4 at some convenient moment, and I won't have any initiative at all, and the position will gradually become more and more about my weak doubled c pawns. So I play f5, bishop to d6, and now I'm committed, so I play f4. And if it's just a matter of pawn structure, my position's horrible, but in fact I have some reasonable attacking chances, in part based on the possibility of this pawn sacrifice with f3 in some lines. And it's in fact hard for White to even move anything. If he were to play, for example, knight to c4, which he'd like to do, or knight to e4, then f3 is quite strong. He can't prevent all of this by playing f3 himself because my knight jumps into e3 and I win the exchange. Though, in fact, my knight's so good there I might want to just leave it in place. What else can he do? If he moves this knight, so let's say he plays knight c3, well, I could still play f3, and on knight takes f3, play bishop to g4. So it's as committal and at first glance unappealing as f4 seems from a strategic point of view, it's in fact quite good from a dynamic standpoint. Alright, so White played c4, I played knight to b4, knight f3, bishop g4, a3, and then here we looked last time quite a lot at the moves rook f5 and rook f6. And it turns out that neither move gives an advantage, though both moves, or well, certainly rook f5. Rook f6 actually isn't so good because bishop takes e5. It's great on everything else. Rook f5 looks to be good for at least equality, but probably not really more than equality. And then it leaves the move that I played, bishop takes f3, which is also playable. And then after g takes f3, queen to h4, which I very briefly considered and which Tate suggested to me after the game, is also very interesting. But again, it looks as if with best play, White can hold. So anyway, I played queen to g5 check, king h1, queen h5, and I believe we looked last time at the alternatives for White here, which include the obvious a takes b4, and here it looks as if, again, the position is about equal. After queen f3 and rook to f5, White gives the piece back with knight to g3, and at the end of all of these exchanges, we end up with probably just a drawn ending at the end of everything. Yeah, so even pawns and roughly balanced position as well. Okay, if White tries knight to g1, which was his original intention, then Black wins with rook f6, and the point being that if a takes b4, Rook h6 first, very important. And after h3, then the rook goes back to g6, followed by queen to g5, mating. Rook to g6 straight away didn't work, as I pointed out last time, because white has the neat sack queen, knight to h3, just giving the piece back, but preventing my queen from hopping onto the g file in a useful way. Okay, so Antonio found a move that never even occurred to me, though perhaps it should have. Knight to d4. Now, in fact, the move is bad, but it's an interesting move, and it's not obviously bad. I mean, the refutation is quite deep. Okay, you might wonder, what's the point of knight to d4? Well, obviously, one point is that he wants to defend this f-pawn. Okay, so that's the most basic point. I'm threatening queen takes f3 check. If allowed to play that, I probably win, at least in most cases. As we said, a takes b4 there because he can give the piece back up he's drawing. But if he doesn't want to play a takes b4, he still has to do something about this pawn. We saw that knight to g1 didn't work because then it gets in the way of his rook defending on the g file. So when I play rook f6 and I eventually load up on the g file, well, he needs this rook to be able to come to g2 or to g1 to help out over there. So for that reason, some other knight move might be indicated. Okay, well, how about knight to c3? This move, of course, I had seen, and against this, I was prepared to play knight to c2. When again, if queen takes c2, I play queen f3 check and rook f6, and this time I just win. I think I just win. Certainly, at the very worst, I'm getting my material back, but I'm probably just winning there. And of course, if he doesn't take, if he moves the rook, well, now my knight gets to go to d4, where it's just beautifully posted. It finally found not only a home, but an ideal location. So by playing knight to d4, he prevents this knight to c2 jump. So that's the idea. Also, if I take his knight, which is what I do in the game, when he eventually plays bishop takes d4 and the rook goes to g1, he may even get some pressure against g7. So all in all, it's a very logical, very clever move. Just turns out that it's perhaps not best, and it's for a specific reason that involves the knight having gone to d4. So we'll see what that is. I played e takes d4 here. Antonio suggested knight takes d3 after the game, but this didn't really appeal to me during the game, and subsequent analysis, both my own and with the computer, didn't really indicate that he was correct about this. So I think he underestimated my possibilities later on. So queen takes d3, ed, and now he can't take with the queen because the f-pawn hangs, but after just bishop takes d4, the position is simply equal, and I don't really see anything great for black here at all. Okay, so I played e takes d4, and I think this is right. He played a takes b4. I played bishop takes b4, and he played bishop takes d4. Okay, so everything seems to have transpired in kind of normal fashion, and it looks like white is more or less okay at this point. My rooks can't easily get over to the h file, and even if they do, rook g1, rook g2 will occur in plenty of time. So stop here for a while and see if you can figure out what it is that black ought to do. This is in fact a key moment in the game. Now the surprising thing is that it really doesn't look like a key moment. It looks as if the smoke is kind of the smoke is cleared, the dust is settled, and it's time to just switch gears and move on to whatever the next thing in the game is going to be. And that's kind of what I did. But in a way it's right, in a way it's wrong. The way that it's right is that the kinds of threats that black can have here are certainly different from what they were a few moves ago. So it's much less likely that I'm going to be able to achieve some kind of direct attack on the H and G files. All right, so against that, he's reasonably well set. But given that he still has some chronic problems, I should have perhaps looked a little more deeply into the position to see what was possible. And in fact, black has an excellent idea here that I simply missed. So I played rook a to d8. He dropped the bishop back, and I played a5. And I'm slightly better here, so I still have some chances, but now at least there's nothing catastrophic hanging over white's head any longer. So he played rook to g1, threatening to take my pawn on g7. I played rook f7, and he plays d4. He'd like to play queen to d3 now, centralizing his queen quite nicely. So I played queen f5, which was a good move, the best move I think. He played queen to b1, takes, and rook to e8. And I think all of my moves here, since the place where I asked you to stop the recording and try to figure out what to do, have been pretty much the right moves. And my next move is also good, though I had an alternative there. But we'll come back to this. But now let's see what it was that I missed. So this was, in fact, my big opportunity. And it's quite surprising, but let's figure out what my assets are in the position. Okay. Clearly, his fractured kingside pawn structure is to my advantage. And the f3 pawn in particular is a bit vulnerable. But what do I do to kind of ramp up the pressure on that? It's not really feasible for me to attack it again with a rook. So my bishop obviously can't even attack it, and pushing g5, g4 is pretty much pointless and could only weaken my own king. So for that reason, I think, or partially for that reason, I think I didn't really suspect that I would have anything here. But if we think of it not from the perspective of attacking f3 more, but removing the defender of f3, then you might have some ideas. And in fact, the idea kind of flashed through my mind, but it's one of those things that unless you really stop and take it seriously, it won't. You can't really use it. And it turns out that obviously I should have stopped and used it. So I have two good moves here, and they generally transpose. One is rook a to e8, and the other is rook f7. And we'll look at the rook f7 move order, which might be the more accurate. Okay, well, let's suppose that white suspects nothing and just plays something like rook takes a7. Okay, rook to e8. And the idea, quite simply, is rook f to e7, and then rook to e1. And I'm exploiting this bishop on b4. And, of course, the fact that white's knight to d4 move allowed me to play e takes d4 and open the e file. So who'd have thunk it? Certainly neither of us during the game, that's for sure. All right, well, here, what does white do? Let's say he plays rook to g1, rook f to e7 anyway. And now there simply, there just isn't any good defense for white against the threat of rook to e1. He can try to sack something here, so bishop takes g7, rook g7, rook c7, hoping for something like rook takes g1, and then he takes back with the queen, check. I have to block with the queen. He trades and plays rook takes c6, and then he's got an awful lot of pawns for the piece. 4 pawns for the piece, in fact. So I don't want to go for that. The right move here is rook to g5. Not cooperating. Okay, let's suppose he plays rook a7, now rook e6. With a threat, hopefully you can all find it in under 5 seconds. That threat is queen takes h2, followed by rook h6 mate. So, takes, say he gives some checks, plays rook to a1, well, rook e1 anyway, and black wins. Alright, so going back, white doesn't have to play rook takes a7. So this time, let's have him defend more conscientiously, let's say with rook to g1. Alright, rook to e8, and now, again, white has some choices. One very interesting line is with bishop takes a7. Here we win by kind of different and devious means. So we play c5, cutting off the bishop. All right, and now let's say queen f1. He's got to do something about this threat of, again, rook fe7, rook e1. But now we play bishop to c3 and bishop to f6. What does this do? Well, the remarkable thing is that we've pretty much trapped this bishop for good, and now we're simply going to try to win it. So if white plays queen to g2 here, we play rook to a8. Goodbye bishop. And if he plays b4, okay, we take. And now if queen g2, queen a5 again traps the bishop. So d4. And now we just cash in. And we're up a couple of pawns here. Oh, sorry, up 1 pawn, but with a very good position. Our position's superior. Our pieces are better coordinated. The b pawn is very dangerous. And so this leaves white in some real trouble. Okay, so going back to here, instead of bishop takes a7, let's look at a couple of other possibilities. So rook to c1 is very logical. So that way on rook f to e7, white plays bishop to c3 and prevents my rook to e1 idea just in the nick of time. Okay, so rook to e6 now. Say bishop to c3, takes, rook f to e7. That might look kind of funny. What's the point of this? Why don't we just double immediately? Well, there are some lines where this rook on e7 needs to guard here, and while this one runs free. So at any rate, white plays d4 here, rook e2, queen f1, queen h4, and white no longer has any satisfactory defense to the threat of my capturing on f2. So rook to g4 is probably the best way to go. Queen takes, and then, well, the rook goes back because I'm threatening rook to e1 mate. So takes. And black is probably winning here. 2 pawns up. Alright, they're not the greatest pawns in all of history, but they're good enough that this should be a winning position for black in the long run. Alright, so going back to here, rook e8. Last try for white is perhaps bishop to b2. Okay, so a5, queen f1, just giving up the pawn here for white, and rook e2. And only a pawn up here, but again my pieces are quite active, and it's probably enough to win. So certainly in all of these variations, white is very much fighting for the draw. Black has well-placed pieces, has extra material, and the c-pawns, okay, they're doubled, they're isolated, but they're not really accessible to white's pieces, and they do a perfectly good job of restraining white's pawns. In light of that, then, it's really not so bad. Really, the biggest liability for black in terms of cashing in his advantage is the fact that this f-pawn may be slightly overextended in some lines. It would be nice, perhaps, if it were back on f5, and in that way, black could organize the advance of the pawns more easily. But still, overall, my advantage should be enough to win. Okay, so rook a to d8. I missed this idea of doubling on the e-file, or at least it flashed through my mind before I realized, or I should say, honestly, even came close to realizing how strong it was. All right, so bishop b2, a5. Looked at this. Okay, queen f5 here. Takes. Rook e8, bishop a1. Okay, now here it might have been worthwhile for me to play g6, just taking time out to stop any monkey business with g7, or to play rook f to e7, and this is okay too. Again, getting ready to play g6. But instead I played rook to e2, and while this is okay, my follow-up was wrong, and usually I'm very good about admitting an inaccuracy. So I realized here that, okay, I don't want to play, that if I play rook takes b2, bishop takes b2, and rook e7, he gets d5 in. And I have to waste a tempo at some point because of the g pawn. So I probably should have just admitted my mistake here and played rook to e6, or I could have even played rook f to e7, and yeah, I mean this would have been just fine too. The point is that, okay, after rook takes e2, rook e2, d5, I didn't like this, but I really shouldn't have cared. So after g6, d takes c6, rook f2 is entirely to my favor. I don't know. I think I probably just saw, okay, he plays d5, wins my c pawn, and rejected it. But if I had reflected on this position, I'd like to think that I would have assessed it properly. But maybe I just didn't really like the idea of him having a pawn that far into my camp. Maybe thought, okay, so like d takes c6, rook takes f2, rook to d1, and worried that something like bishop to e5 or maybe rook to d7 would be a problem, and that I can't play bishop to d6 because of rook takes d6. Okay, but this is probably a bit too superficial. For one thing, well, let me think. Let me see if I agree with the tournament version of me or the current version. I mean, I can win some pawns, but I don't know. So let's try this. Okay, again, bishop to d6 is no good because of rook takes. Though, maybe I could play bishop to d6, let him take, and then play rook f1, rook a1. It's possible. Also, instead of rook to d7, he could play rook to d8 check. Maybe bishop to f8 then. Okay, so let's say rook to d7. All right, if I go greedy here, now rook e1, check, bishop f8, c7. Yeah, this is no good for me because he's going to take on f8 and queen. So I do have to be a bit careful here. I mean, probably there's something simple that I'm missing. I mean, I know I can play rook to d2, but if I play rook to d2, then he swaps and plays bishop to e5. That's obviously not any good. I could play bishop to d2, but still, yeah, that doesn't do anything. Just bishop to e5 again. Okay, so maybe I was right to be skeptical about this. So perhaps after d takes e6, maybe I should beat the retreat with rook to e6 and grab that pawn. And okay, there I'm probably still a touch better. Also, might be possible to play something like king f7 on rook to d1, play king to e6. So that way, now on rook to d7, bishop to d6 isn't so thrilling. If he plays c5, now I think I can do this if nothing else. So check here, takes, and even if c7 were possible, leaving, aside from the rook hanging, I would have rook to c1 now because we got rid of his other c pawn. So yeah, this should be just fine. So rook h7, rook c1, c7, d5, and all right. I mean, black is at least not in any danger here. Well, not serious danger. Okay, so there are a number of possibilities. It is an interesting enough position, and of course, I also don't have to give up the bishop. I can just play bishop takes c5. Yeah, he can't afford to play with this. I take, and now with my king in the area, there's no problem at all. So that's the solution to this variation. Okay, and the moral of this story is, as usual, activate your pieces. So the king is a very important piece in the endgame. That's one of the major differences between an endgame and a middle game, that the king is usually afforded a much more active role. And so by activating it first, I think my chances become much better. Of course, white could play king to g2 here. All right, but I play bishop to c5. And this is probably okay for me too. Anyhow, all interesting stuff. Maybe bishop to d4. So this can be analyzed further, obviously, but just another line. Okay, but anyway, those kinds of considerations are why I rejected it. As we saw, by activating the king, it becomes far less clear. So rook to e6 was good, though, but rook takes b2 was a bit of a mistake. And again, earlier it would have been simpler if I had just played g6 to take care of that stuff right away, then doubled rooks, and only then thought about penetrating on e2 or somewhere else. Okay, so I took, he took, now I played g6, he played rook to d1, rook to e7. At this point, I kind of realized that I no longer have any advantage at all, and so the rest of the game is kind of disappointing. All right, so he played bishop to c1, and here I played rook to e2, which is perfectly fine, but the reason why I rejected g5 was not perfectly fine. So I was afraid, I thought he just plays rook to g1, he hits this pawn, and he hits this pawn. What do I do? Well, hopefully everyone watching sees what I should do here about that. It's quite a simple defense. Rook to e1. Now, I don't recall if I just missed this or if I thought that this bishop ending would be bad for me because I have so many pawns on dark squares. But it's, in fact, just a very easy draw because his bishop can't really get out to get at my pawns. So takes, h4, let's say, h6, takes, king g2, bishop c3. What does he do? Let's say bishop a3. I play king f7 to stop bishop to e7, and then he starts taking my kingside pawns. Bishop to c5, he protects his pawn. And now we just sit and make faces at each other. I mean, there's just nothing really to be done. I can protect my pawns very easily, and likewise him. But if he tries to go for my pawns, then I can counterattack on his. So this is just a dead draw. So I played rook to e2, which is also fine. Bishop takes f4, but here again, just not sure what was going on with my thinking. You know, it's a 9-round tournament. It gets long. You've been playing for a week. You've got the tension going on or at least I've had the tension going on of the whole norm chase, where first I was out of it, and then I had this great run, and I was back in it again. So I think between just being tired and the nervous tension, and now realizing that, okay, I can't win, it's just a matter of fighting for the draw, it's like when the adrenaline just kind of drains out of you, and you just kind of fall apart. And I think something like that must have been going on, because the rest of the way it's just one oversight after another. So here, of course, the obvious move is rook takes f2, and it's the right move. Perfectly good move, and it equalizes. What I was worried about was after bishop c7, rook f3, that he plays d5, and I thought, well, gee, this pawn is going to come barreling down the board. And okay, one of the lines I looked at was c takes d5, c takes d5, and I thought, okay, well, I can't play, and I can't do anything about the pawn at this point, his d pawn. I'm just going to have to go my bishop for it. So I thought, okay, rook takes b3, d6, a4, bishop e7 here. He queens, takes, and just thought, all right, this is, maybe I have some small drawing chances here, but I'm basically busted. But what I didn't realize is that, okay, I can play a3, and now I'm not losing the pawn, because I can play check, and a2. And because of that, now I think it really is a fairly simple draw. I mean, he just can't win my pawn over there. Now, maybe he could just leave his rook on the a file and try to coordinate all of his forces, to attack on the king side, and maybe he can cause enough trouble there for it to not be desirable. I mean, maybe I'll still have to solve some practical problems here. So this, maybe it is, or maybe it really is a draw here with best play, but I'm not sure that my practical difficulties are completely over here. But this line is kind of moot, given that I could, of course, have played rook to f7. So I think somehow in my mind's eye I was a tempo behind here. Like my rook was always a move too late. But rook f7 is just very simple. And if he plays d6, I play rook to d7, and my king is going to come to e6. And, I just either win the pawn, or he's going to have to maybe perpetual check my king away, which may not be so easy. I mean, well, okay, you can maybe play rook to d3, and then check me. But there's just no difficulties here for me whatsoever. So this is a very easy draw for black at worst. So that's kind of unfortunate. So instead I played bishop to d6, which I thought was kind of clever at the time. My idea being that, all right, if he takes, then, he's got so many pawn weaknesses too. And I don't mind. If we end up in a position where we trade off all of the queenside pawns, then it's a very simple draw. Even for me in an exhausted frame of mind, it's a very simple draw. So, for example, king g2, rook here, say d5, takes, whichever one, doesn't matter. And this is an easily drawn ending. Not even challenging. Okay, but white played bishop to e3, which I somehow managed to completely overlook. All right, well, now he'd like to play rook to a1, so I played rook to a2. This is a perfectly good move. c5. Okay, and now figure out what black ought to do with his bishop. Okay, only two moves are eligible here, but which one should I choose? Bishop to e7 or bishop to f8? So you can't go wrong here, because if you guess wrong, well, at least you'll have done what I did. And if you get it right, then one up for you. Well, the move that I chose was bishop to e7. And my thinking was kind of general principle stuff. That, okay, he's going to play d5, which I saw. He takes, I take, and I play king f7, and I'm at least getting my king to the 7th rank without being checked. So, hey, good thing, right? Wrong. Because I shouldn't have brought my king to the 7th rank. I mean, what I should have done is been able to counterattack on his b pawn, swap off a bunch of pawns, and again try to head for this 3-on-2 kingside ending, where it's a very simple proposition to hold it. So the right move would have been bishop to f8. So now if d5 takes, rook b2. Now rook to d7 does not come with tempo. So I take, he takes, and I just push this pawn. And all right, he's not going to win my a pawn, and or if he's going to win it, it'll be at the cost of his c pawn, with again a simple, straightforward draw. So he plays c6, I play rook c3, and no problems for black. No real problems. Maybe white's a touch better, but I think it's more a symbolic edge than anything genuine. Okay, unfortunately I played bishop to e7, d5, takes, and now, of course, the fact that he's taking my c pawn with tempo, and that my bishop is going to be awkward. If I play king to f7 after rook to d7, then I have to worry about bishop to g5. So this is just I've messed things up. At this point now, the advantage is becoming more serious. Okay, so c6 is what I played. I at least wanted to put his rook on a slightly worse square when he takes my pawn. So rook d7, king f8. Bishop to h4 might actually be a possibility here too. So this I didn't really take seriously. In fact, this I probably didn't even look at. I mean, maybe I recognized the existence of the move, but this never really entered my mind seriously. But it actually might be all right. So king g2, rook a3, rook a7, rook b3 takes, and then rook to b8. And now actually, again, I still have some chances to hold. Okay, of course, white doesn't have to play that way. He could play rook to c7. Takes, and again, maybe with my pawn getting to a3 safely, this could be all right as well, kind of like what we saw in the bishop to f8 line. So maybe I still had one more chance here. In the line where he grabs my a pawn, I mean, I'm passive, but I'm keeping the pawn, and I'm just not sure how white's supposed to win this. Of course, he has lots of advantages, but if I just shuttle my bishop on this long diagonal, it isn't evident how white's going to make progress. Certainly not by trading rooks. Trading rooks would be terrible for him because all my pawns are on light squares, immune to his bishop's attack, and they're very easily defended from attacks by his king. So that's not going to do any good. Trading bishops, well, I'm not sure that he can enforce that. And okay, that may or may not be good. That would depend on some other factors, whether such an exchange would be advantageous for me or not. But it's, again, not so clear how he makes that happen. Anyway, the biggest problem that I've got is that my king is stuck on the back rank, and that might be enough for him to obtain some real winning chances. Certainly he's got more chances here than in the bishop to f8 line, but I have more chances here than I do in the game after the move I chose, which was king to f8. Okay, so he played rook c7, rook a3, rook c6, rook b3, rook a6. And now, because my pawn's not getting to a3, my a pawn is far less useful as a distraction for his pieces. All right, again, maybe I should have gone passive, but I don't know. I'm not so sure about that. I think I probably did the right thing. So if I play passively with rook to b7, he plays c6, he plays bishop to f4, c7. Okay, I play here, but with my rook just completely tied down now, I think white must be winning this in the long run. So instead I played rook to c3. I think this is right. Just giving up the pawn, but maintaining some activity. Okay, king f7, rook a7, king e6, rook c7. And now I made a mistake, but a natural one. So I played h5. Not a question mark move, but just slightly inferior. The best move actually is g5, which is kind of unusual. I mean, you think, not to put pawns on the color of your bishop, where it can be more vulnerable, but in this case, it looks like it's just the best way to arrange the pawns, and then to play h6 or h5 in some positions, but to wait. Anyway, I played h5, he played king g2, and now I blundered. Okay, again, I should have played g5, and white should probably win this in the long run, but he still has to prove it. So it's still a position where I'm requiring him to demonstrate some technique. Instead, unfortunately, the collapse was completed by my next move. I played bishop to f6 and immediately realized what I had done before he played rook to c6 check. Okay, well that was the sad ending to my to this hard luck story. But overall, I mean, I think I'm happy with my play overall in the tournament, and I think even in this game, generally speaking, I played quite well, and just at the end, I collapsed. But there are useful lessons. By the way, the point of why this is a blunder, in case anyone doesn't see it, is that after rook c6 check, my king moves wherever, it doesn't matter. Rook f6, and then bishop to d4. Okay, and that happens even if not with check. So let's say king e7, rook takes f6. Okay, I've got no really good swish and zook. I mean, I can play rook takes e3, but the pawn ending here is just completely hopeless. Okay, so anyway, as I said, I lost the game, didn't get the norm, but on the other hand, it was certainly, generally speaking, an affirmation of my ability to play well enough to get a norm, to get norms. And even I think in this game, my judgment was pretty good. But what happened was a couple of things, and these are, I think, a couple of important lessons for all of us. So one is, well, 3 lessons. Okay, so lesson number 1 is, especially if it's a long tournament, you've got to shepherd your energy. So of course you want to try to be in as good a shape as you can be in, and I try to be in reasonable shape, and I also try to exercise even during the tournament. But okay, 9 rounds, it's a long time, and even if you sort of feel okay, I mean, you do slow down. So finding ways to kind of rest up and to shepherd your strength during the tournament is very important when it's a long event. A second point is that when the nature of the game changes considerably, it's worth spending a little extra time, a little more time than you normally would, just gathering your bearings again. And I think in the position after knight to d4 and we had the exchanges, so going back here, at this point I think I really, I resettled a bit, but not as much as I needed to. So let me take a look at my score sheet and see how much time I spent here. So on this move I spent, I spent basically no time. So I spent 8 minutes thinking about this position here. So after he played this, I spent 8 minutes trying to determine what to do. But then I just rattled off my next moves through rook f7. Basically, I used no time. Or I probably used a few seconds because we were playing with increments. But I still had the same amount of time on my clock up through this point, up through rook f7. So that was just way too fast. I mean, I really, even though I spent a fair amount of time here, it was more by way of kind of calculating and looking for ways of trying to make the original set of attacking ideas work, rather than gathering my bearings to get used to the new situation. So here, after I had kind of decided that this was all required, I really should have stopped here. Even if I had come up with rook a to d8 and a5 anyway, which I might have done. I mean, it's a very natural way to proceed, and I could easily have missed the idea of doubling on the e file, or at least underestimating its strength. Even so, I should have at least given myself the chance to find that, to work it out and see, in fact, how good it was. Okay, so that's the second lesson. And the third, and this is just tough, and it's a difficulty for many players. I mean, I've read that Karpov, one of Karpov's strengths, and one of the ways in which he was comparatively unique among his super GM peers, was his ability to regroup when he had gone from a better position to a worse position, to be able to stop the bleeding, as it were, and to kind of muster up his forces, his emotional energy, and keep going without any recrimination at all. Now, in this game, I don't think I really was doing that. I mean, I wasn't that I was beating myself up. I mean, in fact, I didn't really think that I had missed anything. So I thought, okay, I give it my best chance. But as the end game came about, and I realized I didn't have any chance to win the game anymore, or no serious chances to win the game anymore, I probably did relax a bit. So I had kind of lost that competitive tension that was wrapped up in the IM norm, because I had to win the game to get the norm. It wasn't enough for the draw. But generally speaking, again, keeping the full energy as best as you can, and kind of switching off from thinking about the results and what may or may not have been missed to just stay fighting is just crucial. Usually I'm pretty good about that, but in this game I clearly wasn't. So whether it was exhaustion or, again, kind of losing the competitive fire a little bit at the end, or a combination of those two, I mean, I definitely ended the game really not very well at all. So that's something for me to pay more attention to in the future. And certainly I've experienced it on the winning side. So, I mean, I've had more than my share of games where I've been a little bit worse and kind of held on against my peers. And once the game started turning, I've often noticed them collapsing and just falling apart and losing really rapidly. So it is a common phenomenon, even among pretty good players, and again, even among the best of players. I mean, if Karpov has been singled out for having that as a skill, then it shows that even 2600s and 2700s can have that problem. So that's something to keep in mind too, to try to regroup. So there were two places, or two kinds of situations where I needed to regroup and didn't really do so. So the first was when the character of the game really changed fundamentally, and the second one was at the point where I kind of realized, all right, I'm not going to get the norm, but that doesn't matter. I'm fighting for the draw, and I'm going to give it everything I've got and take as much time as necessary to make the best moves I possibly can. So those are, I think, some useful lessons in the game, and hopefully you benefited from them as well as enjoying this presentation. So next week, I'm not sure what I'll be covering. I might do another reader's questions video, or maybe some other topic, but it won't be one of my games for next time. So keep things varied here. Also, before I go, let me remind everyone to check out my blog. Make that so you can add that to your favorites as part of your New Year's routine. And it's at chessmind.powerblogs.com. chessmind.powerblogs.com. So thank you very much, everyone. Happy New Year. And I look forward to doing more shows for you in 2009. Take care. Bye-bye.